Good afternoon, all. Let me start by saying thank you for those who are attending through our webinar. This is our second webinar. It's great to have you. Thank you and welcome. Thank you to our speakers today, Stephen, Joseph, and Jevon Hudson. Jevon is joining us from the Pacific Coast, and Stephen is in the East Coast, so thank you. And we hope today our discussion will contribute a meaningful and a constructive one, right? And interesting topic, facial recognition. I want to thank our team, Anu, who's helping with the moderating in the back end, and our other team members from Mentorship, Madhu, Manju, Sabina, and Susan, who are helping put this weekly webinars together. So I've been reading about it. It's a very interesting topic. I've been learning a lot about it, and I'm sure during this discussion, you're going to understand more that you didn't know before, some surprises as well. So what is facial recognition? It's an automated process that compares faces, right? So it's comparing our face to a database, and it's an automated process. But I'm sure Stephen and Jevon, you would say that it's more than that, Nazira, right? Because it can even detect your emotions. And it can tell you whether you look like an offender or what you've bought or if there are any crimes you've committed. So facial recognition technology can do that. But I want to introduce our panelists briefly. If you want to read their bio, please visit our website, vendorship.net, and go into the events page, and their detailed bio is right there. Stephen has 20 years of industry experience, and he is managing a team right now with C2 Digitron, which focuses on image recognition, facial recognition, and cloud computing domain. And thank you, Stephen, for being here. And you are the co-founder and the CEO of C2 Digitron. Yes. Jevon Hudson, thank you for joining us. You are the technology policy advocate, human-computer interaction researcher. Wow, that's a lot, Jevon. All the best. And you are also a third-year student at the University of Washington School of Law, and your perspective is really going to help us understand, put the policy perspective as well as the technology perspective together, and we'll be able to say more as we go through the discussion. But before we go further, I do want to ask you a question just to get to know you guys. During this lockdown, what is that one thing you've started to acknowledge or you're being thankful for?
Thankful for it is like actually it's like outside activities are cut off, and then it is like we are actually like able to spend actually most valuable family time. That is the one thing actually it's like we got actually it's like I'm thankful for.
Very nice. How about you, Jevon?
Yeah.
I really appreciate the outdoors. I mean, I'm an avid hiker out in Washington State, and all of our national parks have been closed, as well as our state parks, and I miss them dearly. So I mean, I generally appreciate them, but I appreciate them even more now. And as soon as those parks open, I will be out in the mountains as soon as it's legal.
Sure. So thank you so much for your insight there. And our agenda for today's presentation is we're going to go ask a couple of questions. We're going to ask a couple of questions of the speakers. And then Stephen has a few slides where he's going to go deep dive down into what the technology looks like. And then we're going to come back and continue the discussion with the policy and the laws and the privacy and the ban and the database, etc. So Stephen and Jevon, this question is for both of you. So facial recognition, as we talked about, is measuring the face, right? So can you tell us a little bit more, what is facial recognition software? I know we're going to go deep into your presentation later, but how does it affect my life, right? So it's a template, it's comparing to the database. Stephen, and then I would like Jevon to respond.
Yeah, thanks, Nazira. It's facial recognition. It's like it has a lot of use cases. It is actually it's like currently it is like ease of. I would say that it's mainly it is like one-way security, one use case of that one, and the other way is like ease of use. It is like security is like very heavily used right now. It is like everywhere. It is like wherever it is like the access control, surveillance, everywhere it is heavily used, and it's like getting popular all over the places, and it is like mainly for the safety, like police department and all. It is like very, very useful. And another case, actually, another side of that is like ease of use. Right now, it is like you see everywhere it is coming. Actually, it's like very easily available, and actually, it's like you don't need to enter the PIN. Actually, you don't need to like swipe your card. Actually, it's like it sees your face, and the airports it sees your face, and it's like it allows you like go through. So it is like lot of actually it's like it's like ease of use as well as like security in both places. Like facial recognition is like heavily used.
Jivan, the same question for you. How does the facial recognition software affect my life or anyone who's listening today?
Yeah, so I think I want to break down a few different areas of both facial recognition as well as sort of human-centric computer vision, as I think the policy debate has definitely shifted to include, I think, more expansive forms of what some might refer to as facial recognition or facial analysis, or other forms of sort of computer vision that's analyzing a human body, a human movement, to make particular inferences or decisions. So we can think about a few different options here, right? There's the sort of biometric recognition, where we're attempting to recognize someone on the basis of their face, their iris, their ear. This can be either a sort of a one-to-one verification, verifying an image to an existing image within a database. It can be an image to a variety of images in a database, where there is then, say, a percentage likelihood that there is a match between those images. There are other forms of sort of technology that falls under this umbrella. We can think of sort of soft biometrics, where we can think about detection classification, whether that be age, gender, ethnicity, race, height, skin color, all of which that have its own incumbent sort of policy and ethical questions. And then I think what's often sort of left out of some of the debates, but some advocates have sort of brought in, are sort of the non-biometric analytics that can be anything from detection segmentation, trying to detect the face, right, the boundaries of a face, or that a face exists rather than the face print itself, detection segmentation, like a person, a body, a pedestrian, and then we move into other forms of non-biometrics like detection segmentation classification, face attributes, a smile, glasses, beard, gestures, body parts, and then sort of lastly to detection classification like emotion, neurological status, your employability, a host of sort of inner characteristics that some vendors may claim that they are able to infer on the basis of an external characteristic. So I open up sort of the frame here mostly because for policymakers, they're trying to consider a constellation of technologies that might not just be sort of the one-to-one facial recognition that many, myself included, tend to accept as normatively okay, right? Verify my face on my license or my passport. Where a lot of folks tend to raise more questions is when you're comparing a face to a database of faces in which your face is not in or potentially not in, as well as then to other forms of analytics where you're using my face or facial features to make other sorts of inferences or judgments about my character or my capabilities.
Very, very good. Thank you so much for that detailed explanation, both of you. We cannot talk about facial recognition without speaking about privacy, right? So, of course, technology in this age and era has permeated almost every day of all our lives. Government or non-governmental agencies, companies, other use facial technologies in some way or the other, right? Again, we have to weigh the good and the bad, and the use and the misuse of it, right? For example, Facebook recently agreed to pay $550 million fine because of an Illinois state issue that they were having based on photo tagging. So I've realized that Facebook is not suggesting photo tagging anymore. So it was a tough and a costly lesson to learn. So my question is this what each company is going to go through? Or what steps have companies, especially companies like yours, Stephen, taken to protect privacy?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's like privacy. It's like concern in the facial recognition era domain. It's like always. It's like balance. It's like if you want security, it is like you have to compromise on the safety side. It is like a privacy side. If you want privacy, it's like you have to compromise on the security side. It's like, but actually it's like technologies are evolving. There is actually, it's like when we go to the slides, I can little bit explain about that one. There are some things called the edge computing that is now getting popular now. That is actually, it's like the facial recognition within the device itself. So that actually is like acts, and it is like it actually recognizes, identifies, acts, and all the processing within the device itself. You don't need to go to any other third-party software, storage, everything. So those actually, it is like it stores some data, but actually it's like currently it's like we don't even know, we actually don't need to store any data at all. It is like we just process it and get the result back. Okay, so it's like only, it is like supposedly if I take that, actually it's like a criminal identification. It is like cameras, actually body worn cameras. Actually it's like it does not need to store all the data. Currently it is like for the after the fact they are storing the data, and but actually it's like some of the motion detection cameras, surveillance cameras, that does not need to store all the data and copy the pictures. It is like if there is any actually alert needs to be triggered, that time actually they can copy the picture. It is like, so that kind of things are evolving currently. It's like, so the technology wise actually it's like we are addressing concerns. Actually it's like companies, hardware companies, software companies, they are addressing the concerns. But actually currently it is like it's like evolving. Currently it is like it's a balancing act, I would say.
Okay, very nice. So, Javan, you can also chime in for that question, but also the other question I have is I learned recently about geofencing, right? And I was like, oh my gosh. So people, when they go for a protest or a rally, some of the departments or the governmental agencies can actually monitor their cell phone data, their social media, and sort of match out who these people are and look at their website, etc. And that's so scary, Jevon. I'm sure it's scary for anyone who listens to this too. And then the governmental agencies, such as the law enforcement agencies, have also collaborated with the Ring a security system to share the videos. So there are so many things that's going on, and we as a human, as a citizen who are looking for some of our privacy, respected. My question is, how will technology move beyond consent to include the privacy protection?
Thank you. So I'll answer turn. The first point, I think sort of what companies might be doing or being more careful at the point of collection, particularly around issues of consent. Obviously, you had mentioned the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, where Facebook did not require adequate consent. So I think for folks who are collecting facial data, making sure that they acquire adequate consent, whether or not they're in Illinois, is prudent. But I think to your second question is, to what extent do we move beyond consent? There was a great law review piece that came out a few weeks back from Professor Woodrow Hartzog at Northeastern, as well as Evan Selinger at the Rochester Institute of Technology, that effectively wrote that facial recognition is unconsentable, right? That even to the extent that we individually consent in a one-to-one transaction, we are not adequately able to consent to the broader structural harms that the use of the technology engenders, which I personally agree with. And I think towards your sort of example sort of gets at why, right? We have a constellation of other technologies that exist that allow us to surveil, track a host of different populations, whether those are dissidents, protesters, journalists, minority communities, any community we choose to target. And when you pair together facial recognition with geofencing and social media surveillance, one, like obviously there are significant chilling effects, but very much degrade notions of privacy. I mean, personally, as a privacy scholar and a privacy advocate, notice and consent has been broken as a framework, right? We use notice and consent to sign a variety of forms to sign our data away, and ultimately does not, in my view, protect the autonomy, agency, or meaningful privacy of individuals. I think where we run into problems, particularly around the consent framework, is in the policy space. So in a number of the bills I've worked on around facial recognition, there's always the debate of what type of consent do we use, right? Is it just opt-in? Is it opt-out? Is it affirmative consent? That's if we're going with the consent framework. And the problem, and we've seen this both in the state legislature and even the work in the Port of Seattle, is that when we move beyond to a more strengthened consent, whether that's affirmative opt-in or just affirmative consent, many of the efficiency gains from facial recognition are lost. right? The use of biometric error exit, if there is an affirmative opt-in, the time you've saved using facial recognition is evaporated because you're protecting privacy rights, right? Because the two sorts of goals, efficiency, right, and meaningful privacy, are not necessarily achievable in tandem. And that's even if we want to work within a consent framework. So I think where I stand as a scholar and as an advocate is I think we need to move beyond consent as a framework and think about privacy as a more enforceable human right. I know some folks have talked about private property rights. I'm less in that domain, but I personally, as you know, as an individual consumer and an advocate and scholar, I don't find consent to be. It's not. In a space now where we're trying to get to what does privacy law look like outside of the bounds of a consent framework, because so many of us, whether institutionally or even within sort of the corporate setting, are used to these frameworks and want to continue to operate within them, and it causes quite a bit of risk and tension when folks want to move, you know, beyond the sort of traditional opt-in, opt-out frameworks, particularly when it comes to facial recognition.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm sure there are people who would say, well, sorry, that's not your private space, that's public space, right? But we'll come back to that. We're going to discuss in detail about the law and enforcement and the policy implications. My question, so it's a great segue to head to Stephen's presentations right now. Stephen, if you can go ahead and sort of enrich us with more information on what this technology entails, that'll be great.
Sure, yeah. I will do the screen sharing.
And there is a Q&A session towards the end, so the audience, we will respond to the audience's questions.
Sorry,
Yes.
able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So this facial recognition system, which is like we have deployed in some of the customer sites in South America, this is for the visitor management domain. Mainly it's like around like security and access, for security and access control. And this we deployed this actually it's like and like mostly use this software actually it's like in office buildings and warehouses where the security has to be controlled, the access has to be tracked, the traffic has to be tracked. So those are the places it's like we use this one. How that system works is we install cameras at the entrances of the office building and warehouses where the access has to be controlled. The camera actually is like detects motion. If there is any motion, it takes the picture and it sends the picture to the facial recognition software. The facial recognition software receives the picture, processes the images, and reports back identifies the person and reports back the person details. If there is any unknown person, it triggers an alert. The alert can be configured in any way. The alert can be sent to any authorized persons, or it can be a system alert. This is totally customizable. It can be configured in any way. If for the identified persons, like it will be the details will be sent out to the integrated software. It's like I will talk about the software actually integration, such as next part in when we talk about the architecture. Here actually it's like it will give out all the reports back, actually details about the person, like visitor name, number, any identification number. In South America, they use DNA rep numbers, and also it is like which place he's going to. It is like all those details can be whichever. This is also it's like totally customizable. We can actually like configure in any way depends on the user requirement. So this is about the solution is, and the architecture part of it is like how the system works. This is what actually is like whole architecture is. Currently, it is like we run the facial recognition model both in cloud as well as in the edge computing. Edge I will talk about that next slide. Currently, it is like in this one, actually, is like how the cloud architecture works is the cameras, whenever it detects any motion, it takes a picture of the person. Actually, it's like, and sometimes there may be like other motions also, but our software can detect the faces and it's like it can say whether there is a person inside. So it sends a picture to the cloud, and the cloud folder receives that picture and sends the picture to the face recognition model. Face recognition model picks the pictures, processes the picture, and identifies the person in it, and sends the response back to the third-party integrated software for the next set of actions, like opening the digital logs, opening the gate, and so reporting all kind of purposes. So that result will be sent back to the integrated software. We can integrate with any kind of software. Actually, it's like it's a JSON format. It's a architecture, and and also the details will be stored in our storage. It's like cloud storage. We are using S3 storage. That is like a AWS proprietary one. We use mainly the AWS cloud. So that actually from that we can actually take the details for the reporting. So this is how that cloud architecture works. The same way, that is actually like, as I talked a little earlier, it's like about the privacy things, and also for the latency, we actually use edge computing. Edge computing is nothing but the software runs in the device itself, the camera itself, and or sometimes in the local server, local AI server. So it does not need to come to the cloud. Here also, almost the same kind of concept. The camera, whenever it detects motion, it takes a picture and sends to the picture to the face recognition model. The model processes the picture, identifies the person, and sends the data to the result to the integrated software. The software like it does the next set of action workflows, like opening the gates, locks, etc. So in this case, actually the result, only the essential details will be sent to the cloud, and will be stored in the cloud. It is like not the picture. So it also depends on the use case. It is like use case by use case. Some places like where highly privacy, it's like need to be actually maintained. We don't need to send the picture. It is like we can store the picture in the local database itself. And some places, like if there is actually no issues, we can send all the pictures also to the cloud. And in some cases, actually, it's like we don't even need to, it's like as we talked about actually the privacy in the first question, it's like here is the actual answer. We don't need to, it's like it's some like we don't even need to store the pictures. Just we can process the picture, we can send the results for the set of actions. For only for some troubleshooting purposes, we can store the pictures. So other cases, we don't even need to store the pictures. So that's why we can protect the privacy. This is how the edge computing works. And the next is actually like how the whole facial recognition architecture works. It has actually two processes. It's first is the training process, and the next process. Training process is like it's we have to train the system first to do any prediction. Suppose like if we are actually like deploying the software for any of the office complexes, if the office has 100 employees, first we have to train the system with all the employee pictures. Normally we collect 5 to 10 pictures for all the employees, and we give those pictures to the system for training. The model actually is like whenever the person comes in real time, it actually is like identifies the person and reports the details about the person. So this is actually like this is the training process, and the prediction process like MTCN and KNN algorithms, and there are actually for variety of actually cases we can actually that could be different kinds of algorithms for actually like our office actually use cases. This better for us. It's all about the architecture. It is how the training process and the prediction process works. So this model can be actually it's like used in office buildings and surveillance to identify the criminals whenever it's like in the law enforcement. It's like it will be very much useful, and we can actually connect to the criminal database, and we can try to identify the criminals in real time, and we can alert the police in real time so they can take actions. So this can be used for the surveillance and tracking, and many countries currently it's like using that one. So it's like some part of that is like getting used like here in police department also. And another use case actually is like this is facial recognition along with thermal scanning. Currently, because of the COVID situation, it's like in many countries they are installing thermal cameras at the public places. It's like metros, the metro station, those kind of places. So what it does is like it identifies the persons like who are passing along, and then it identifies, like it measures the temperature also. It is like from the long distance, and it identifies if anybody has higher temperature. It is like the authorities can actually like act accordingly, take them for test them, and take them for treatment. So all those cases. So it is like in many places, actually many countries, they are currently started using this one. This is used along with the facial recognition. Some places they use the thermal imaging also. So this is one. This is like kind of actually it's like multiple use cases. Like as we talked about, it's like emotions, all those things. Like this is actually very good use case right now for the thermal screening. And also, it's like for the current situation, it's like there is another thing called facial recognition along with image classification. There is a compliance monitoring for this current COVID situations. Like many governments mandates using protective clothing like mask, and it's a mask in the public places, and also protective clothing. It's like in controlled environments. So this is actually it's like using this facial recognition solutions. We can identify if any person is like not wearing the mask actually where they are supposed to wear that one. So this is actually it's like and we can alert to the system can alert. So this is another use case for that facial recognition as well as and it's like this is all about that facial recognition architecture and use cases.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen. We can do the stop sharing screen now, so we can get back. So thank you. Oh my gosh, you explained it within 5 to 7 minutes, and I'm sure there's a lot that goes. And Javan is already smiling because he's trying to interrupt such technologies. I'm just kidding, Javan. So thank you, Stephen, for explaining that more in detail. So now that we've seen the uses of the technology for useful, for the broader purpose. My question is, how does Javan society or a community balance the need to identify and track people, as we talked about the good and the bad, especially the wrongdoers, with the right to privacy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a impact, but I think frankly, it's not a one-to-one balance. I think there's a clear balance against usage. I think the use cases are, in my view, there aren't enormous many of them, right? Whether it's attempting to find particular criminals, or as we've heard, the state legislature find trafficked children, spot criminals, right? That obviously those normatively are good things, right? We would like to have technology that's able to do that, but at what cost, right? If everywhere I go, my face is being watched, whether I'm in public, whether I'm in private, whether I'm in a store, whether I'm in an airport, whether I'm in a bowling alley, any institution, whether I'm having my temperature taken, whether I'm having my emotions read, that collective structural experience is pretty eviscerating to basic principles of, a democratic society, right? My ability to live freely, to go about the world freely, right? To not be tracked and arbitrarily surveilled or profiled or discriminated against, right? In this, might have different cultural differences. I speak, as someone who lives in the United States, who, I live in a Western state where liberty is a value, right, that we place quite highly. And I think where folks think about this balance, they're like, look, if facial recognition is able to do these sorts of things, which I would contend in many ways hasn't, in that we have not seen many demonstrations of finding these kidnapped children or finding these criminals. In fact, we're seeing examples where people are misidentified, otherwise deemed criminals when they're not, that whether these sort of small use cases justify a broader overarching surveillance system. And for many folks, the answer is no. Right? I might want us to find child predators using facial recognition, but I also don't want to be subject to it in daily life. Right? I think it ties into, and I write about this in others as well, is that it ties into a larger architecture of sort of what we would call social credit scoring. Right? We've seen this portrayed in a variety of forms of popular fan fiction, but we've seen this play out in China, where there are systems that are evaluating, right, your sort of social credit, and facial recognition, in my view, plays a role into that, right? Monitoring where you go. Did you go to the liquor store? Did you not go to the liquor store? Were you in the union hall? Were you not in the union hall? Were you late to work? Were you not late to work? Right? It's not just, is this you, right? But this can contribute as sort of a larger system to privacy harms, to civil rights harms. And I think that's when we think about the balance, most folks are like, no. right? Which is why we move towards regulations that are sort of tighter restrictions, because in many cases, if a company can collect more data, get more data about you, they're going to want to, because they can use that money for advertising to learn more about you. And at the end of the day, we now have either law enforcement entities who want perfect surveillance to watch us all of the time in order to protect against all forms of crime, right? Which, I think some of us don't necessarily want perfect law enforcement for a variety of reasons. And then the other side, the sort of corporate side, without laws in place, there's sort of a race to the bottom, as we've seen in just sort of broader big data practices, is just collect as much as possible and then use that data. And we see that in grocery stores, where they're now attempting to use facial analysis, facial recognition, and other human-centered computer vision to watch where your eyes are going, right? Maybe if I'm in a grocery store, I don't want people staring at my face to see where I'm looking, right? It might help you arrange your shelf, right? But maybe I think you were doing just fine with your shelf before watching my every movement. And so I think where I stand is like, look, if we have issues with security, let's dedicate more money to resources for folks who are experts in security, rather than creating particular systems that can result in harms for folks. But obviously that's, my perspective. But yeah, I think for me, the use cases and the sort of justifications for use do not outweigh the broader collective harms the technology engenders. But of course, folks have different perspectives on that. But,
So you brought up the fundamental rights and, of course, the First Amendment issues and the Fourth Amendment concerns. So with that, my question to Stephen is, in New York, they identified more than 10,000 people who had more than one driver's license, right? And then in New Jersey Department, they identified around 2,500 fraud cases, right? But my question to you is, Stephen, is there any evidence that we need this technology at all? And I know you are into this technology, but I want to give you an opportunity to say,
Yeah, of course, this is actually, it's like, so you already talked about, it's like balance between the privacy. Actually, the technology is not much advanced to it is like to take care of the privacy fully, but it is like evolving. It is like we can actually, it's like using actually like lot of places currently it is like for tracking they are using the thermal imaging. So thermal imaging is nothing but it doesn't actually, it's like just to give the image, doesn't store any pictures, anything. And also like I talked about edge computing. So this kind of things actually is like using that is like, yeah, actually it's like we need to have a privacy. It is like that is like absolutely necessary. And and also the security part of it. The security is also very, very important. So wherever actually it's like security is at risk, we need to have this technology. And also it is like, as I said, it's like technology is evolving, and we can actually we are taking care of privacy. It is like concerns also into the technology.
Very nice. Go ahead, Javan.
I think an interesting sort of security point, and this is less on security in the sort of physical security sense, but in the cybersecurity sense, is what's interesting to me is to the extent that entities do store face prints, facial data, which some do, when that information is lost, when it's breached, when it's exfiltrated, where I am also concerned, right, is there is no way roll out traditional remediation protocol if you lose your face, right? If say I lose your password, reset your password. If your account's been breached, we're going to unroll multi-factor authentication to avoid further breaches. But the problem is once the face print is lost, barring a really expensive surgery on my part, it's very hard to reset my facial anatomy, right, or my voice print, which I think to me raises interesting risks for folks who are deciding to use either facial recognition or just collecting biometric data generally. Is that data, once it is lost, it's very hard in any ways to reset that, right? To reset your face, to reset your movements, which has been another sort of concern that myself as well as other practitioners in the space have raised, is that the data is so sensitive that once you've lost your face, we can't really roll out, say, a multi-face authentication. I'm not yet a Hydra, but maybe after this this pandemic, I might be one. But an interesting sort of security question, because there's a security value to facial recognition that folks put forward to protecting vicinity spaces, but there's also a security vulnerability in the use of biometrics once that's particularly in sort of a consumer setting, right, where you have particular obligations to protect that data once it's lost.
Yes. So with that said, Javan and Stephen, FBI has around 641 million images in their database, right? And the federal government is almost spending $1 billion for the next generation identification system database. And to say that none of the government or non-governmental agencies are not using the facial recognition technology would be wrong, because it's been used. It's been used now. And for city lights and smart cities and retail stores, restaurants, and schools, hotels, and sporting events, and churches as well. We might not know it, but it's being used, right? My question is, Javan, you're also drafting or have drafted the House Bill 1654 in Washington State, and you're advocating for stringent restrictions for the local, state, and national and the international level for this specific technology. Can you speak a little bit more? Because I see the importance of this, but if you are drafting a legislation that says we just need more time to fix this, and then we'll get it out rather than banning it, can you speak more to it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's actually what we worked on. So to clarify, it wasn't an all-out ban, so to speak. It was a similar model that was deployed in San Francisco under their sort of facial recognition moratorium, where sort of the goal of the bill, and this is 1654, and I'll talk about, obviously, another question, some of the other bills we've worked on. What 1654 effectively said is like, look, if the state of Washington, any of its affiliated agencies, locales, cannot use facial recognition for X period of time until we have worked out the law. Right. And so there's a period where not only policymakers have to develop a regime, but as well, what we had in the moratorium is like, look, you also have to meet these sorts of standards. Right. To some vendors, they would contend that those standards were effectively impossible. Right. Like being perfectly accurate on persons with disabilities, people who are persons of color, people who are children. Right. Which technically speaking can be quite hard. Right. And so in many ways, folks would argue it was sort of a ban. But effectively, what the point of the legislation was is like, look, this raises enough concerns for legislators, policymakers, citizens. Let's press pause and put together sort of a framework. Some states have done it as let's press pause and then take the next legislative session, next 2 years, put together a law. Once we're happy with that law, we remove the moratorium. Others have taken the moratorium route, whereas you cannot use it unless you meet these standards, those standards being quite high, both in terms of accuracy, in terms of the ability to, say, challenge a decision, because a lot of the concerns was not just, can it actually identify people correctly? Obviously, we've heard a variety of controversy around particular facial recognition algorithms that have upwards of like 30% disparity on Black women, or massive disparities for persons who are children or people who are disabled, which is a big problem, particularly if you're misidentified, and that's in a security context, right? Like if like what happens if the system gets that wrong? If a mistake by a video-based surveillance system may mean an innocent person is followed, investigated, and maybe even arrested and charged for a crime he or she did not commit, right? A mistake by a body camera could be even more lethal, right? And when we think about it in other circumstances, some of the bills we had worked on this past session is, look, if you're deploying facial recognition, say a Target or a grocery store or a host of institutions that, we regularly need to, access both for our ability to resource, but when people are, say, denied access because they are labeled as either risky, suspicious, maybe they look similar to a previous shoplifter, right? Not only does that function to deny someone the basic resources that we are due, right, which is no violation of civil rights, but also is sort of a question of dignity, right? You have been marked as criminal, you have been marked as lesser or somehow deviant, whether that is bound in a historical fact that you had, say, stolen from that store before, or just because you might look like a group of people who historically the sort of store owner associated with a particular population. So it raises questions about privacy, it raises questions about civil rights, and I think part of what we are trying to grapple with, both as a policy team that I lead as well as the state, is trying to figure out where should it be off limits, right? Which is less of a ban question, right? It's not like end all facial recognition always. I think, frankly, we should be researching it, because if we're going to use it, it needs to be better, right? But research on facial recognition is not the same as deploying it everywhere where people are operating, right? And so part of our goal was to identify places of public accommodation as an area where, facial recognition, emotion recognition really should not be making decisions about whether or not you can enter these establishments. Reason being is they conflict with basic civil rights protections on places of public accommodations. Obviously, that's one position of sort of an arena that maybe we should be more sensitive about use cases. But I think when these systems either get it wrong or in some cases get it right, they raise serious questions about basic civil rights and privacy that not only scare individual people, but make it quite a bit harder for for the legislator or for say civil rights practitioners to sort of enforce those rights. And as I'm sure folks are aware, there are a variety of legal sort of problems that govern algorithmic systems. Not only are they technically abstract, which make it very hard for judges, for attorneys, for defenders to adequately understand the nature of a system, right? But then there's another layer of obscurity, which is trade secret protection. Because in many cases, the facial recognition algorithms are proprietary, right? They've been developed by private entities, like for their private gain. And it's harder for people to be like, look, if I've been misidentified, how do I challenge that process? Washington State is working towards that in the bill that was passed, basically in order to use a facial recognition system to make a decision about somebody that has legal import, you need to use meaningful human review, which I personally have some qualms with meaningful human review as the standard for protecting privacy and civil rights. But under that system, basically, you could not use facial recognition system unless, one, the decision could be challenged or overturned, and that there was a person sort of in place sort of verifying or otherwise validating it. So you couldn't say deny someone a loan solely on analyzing their facial image, right? You need to have at least someone there. Is that perfect? In my view, no, right? But sort of get to some of the issues folks have that aren't just, is the image being stored, but it's what decisions are being made. Can those decisions be challenged after the fact? Because in many of these contexts, whether that's being arrested, being denied access to a store, or being labeled as aggressive on a body camera and then subsequently injured or killed, you can't remedy that, right? And I think for policymakers, they're in a position to say, look, maybe if we can hit pause for a moment, wait maybe a year, maybe 2 years, whatever we need, we would rather wait, fix it out and then roll it out if need be and if at all. But we'll see. I mean.
Right. So, Jevin and Stephen, of course, we hear a lot about this technology and the unreliability in the correct recognition, the misidentifications, especially with the people of color, right? And that does scare a little bit. And hence some of the lawmakers or the legislators have banned this technology in areas such as Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, Massachusetts, that the police cannot use this technology. But there are cities like Detroit and Chicago and other places that in Florida that they've started to consider or are already using it. My question to Stephen is, how much has accuracy improved in recent years? And can this be integrated into the mobile device? So the body camera that the police wears is real time, is able to tell them who this person is.
Yeah, this is such accuracy. It's an evolving technology. It's accuracy. It's improved, very much improved over the period. It's last couple of years. The accuracy is very much improved. The accuracy depends on it's a lot of factors. It's so how close the picture is, and it's how the distance, and also it is the backgrounds, the lightings, and the quality of the picture. So all those comes into play. So it is currently I would say it is for close-up shots. If you see it's very much more than 99% accurate. It is a close-up pictures, and with the high quality cameras, it's more than 99% accurate. But the surveillance, everything goes little it's longer distance one. And if it goes longer distance, normally the quality of the camera comes into play. And also it is the backgrounds also. It is so that in that cases it is the quality is getting improved. It's more currently it is there are so many algorithms currently it is in play. It's in R&D. It is it's all the so there are so many things pre-processing before doing that one, before doing the actual prediction. And also it is in that cases it's a little bit it is if it is not able to accuracy it's less. We mostly currently it's like the new technologies actually is like assisting, because the technology alone cannot predict, okay, this is the person actually is like is a criminal, it's like just like go and arrest him. So you cannot say like that. The technology can assist the actually authorized person. Actually, this can assist the person. It can say that, okay, this person look like this person, this criminal. Okay, just actually it's like we can alert him. It's like, so those kind of places, like the accuracy is less, actually a little bit. So it's like we can help the law enforcement. So this is what actually is like to your point. Actually, it's accuracy depends on a lot of factors. Like as I said, it's like distance, also background, everything. So, but accuracy is improving a lot nowadays.
Very nice. So, so we have 1 more minute or 2 more minutes, and then I want to head to the questions from the audience. Mike, yes, go ahead, Jevin.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of jump in there because I think there's 2 things to add on sort of the accuracy discussion. In December, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, who's effectively the major sort of regulator around facial recognition accuracy, published a report showing how effectively 189 face recognition algorithms submitted by over 100 developers sort of fared at identifying different demographics. And from NIST's own study, the test revealed that many of the algorithms were upwards of 10 to 100 times more likely to inaccurately identify a photograph of a black face or an East Asian face, which, I mean, this was a December study from the government agency that is otherwise supportive of facial recognition, which should be a concern. And I think the other point to make is, putting bias aside, there are folks who raise the question, why would we want a perfectly accurate surveillance system, right? Like there are a number of folks who sort of argued in response to IBM's, look, let's have more black faces in our database to make our facial recognition algorithm more accurate, is maybe I don't want the system to be good at finding me, right? That there's actually a larger harm in having a perfectly accurate surveillance state rather than a biased one. Obviously, that's an interesting sort of argument, but sort of the 2 sort of sides of there are serious bias issues, but there are also serious issues if we fix all of the bias. But to your questions.
Definitely. So, so the tension isn't new, right, Jevin and Stephen? Back in 1888, I think the photography equipment was available to the masses, and the chaos started, and what this is and how it could impact their privacy and lives. And slowly it evolved, and we cannot think of our lives without photographs, right? And so similarly, I see this technology evolving. A few years from now, once the legislation like yours passes, Jevin, and once technologies like Stevens continue to improve on their accuracy and the details that need to be, so it doesn't create a discrimination by the technology, it would make sense. But my question, my sort of a final question is, should I be afraid of the facial recognition technology?
Good question.
I'll let you start, Stephen.
I would say very more useful than actually it is like than it's like harming. It's like currently it's like very much it's like uses a lot. Actually, it's like it is very useful for me.
Go ahead, Jevin.
Well, I actually wrote a piece for the Rift on whether or not we should fear facial recognition. So I think you can hear my answer. And I think there are a number of reasons as to why I think it's worth sort of fearing facial recognition. First is just sort of a general concern about sort of mission creep, right? My concern is less about just facial recognition, but a constellation of technologies, whether they be biometric surveillance or analysis, that put together provide unprecedented power to governments and to private entities to automatically identify, locate, track, make inferences and decisions about us on the basis of our face, our bodies, our movements, our gestures, our voice prints. And that's something that we should all be concerned about, right? We've seen this play out in China, where there are literal Uyghur minorities being subjugated and imprisoned that was facilitated by a system that allowed individuals to search for Uyghur-looking faces, right? I think to Stephen's point, what I'm concerned about is how customizable the technology is. Under current law, nothing necessarily stops a company from saying, I want you to identify every black person that walks in the store. I want you to identify every person who's wearing a cross around their neck. I want you to identify everyone who comes out of that union hall down the street, right? And my concerns are less about sort of the individual harms, which are which are great, but the sort of structural harms, not only to civil rights, to privacy, but to democratic society. And I think part of what bothers me as well is sort of the notion of sort of plural existence, right? That we exist beyond the physical form of who we are, right? And when these systems deem us to be something, right, or unable to deem us, to me, raises questions, right? Like there are questions about the use of facial recognition or sort of AI analytics in video interviewing, right? If you're determining how say cultured someone is, how energetic someone is, how emotional they are, right? All of those are culturally informed. The expression of emotion differs widely, right? But if these systems are being used to determine whether or not you're employable, that has drastic implications for maybe someone who doesn't speak English as a first language. Maybe that has drastic implications for someone who might have a mental disability or condition that has problems for paying attention or say keeping eye contact with a camera, right? And it's these sort of where we hit this sort of algorithmic optimization of trying to be like, okay, we need to find X when human life is not X. We are complicated, we are plural, we are different. And where I get concerned about sort of the automated algorithmic society is it clashes with sort of the uniqueness of human existence, right? Which maybe that's more of a meta point, but I think when we move towards systems of automation that try to watch us, know what we are, know who we are, know what we're feeling, whether that's private entities or the state, to me, that raises concerns. That said, I've also watched Black Mirror, so I have some ideas, but we've seen this play out in practice. And I think maybe just to end, and I think this is what I think folks really forget, is that this builds onto historical practices. Like facial recognition or the concerns people have about facial recognition are not new. If folks who had ever read the book, How IBM Facilitated the Holocaust, in many ways, it was IBM's Hollerith machine that was used and built for the Nazi regime that allowed the country to track and lock down all of these people, which is why, folks in the Netherlands bombed data centers, right? It's the notion of tracking, of surveillance and analysis raise really visceral responses that are historically informed by histories of oppression. And so I think it's good to be sensitive, it's good to be skeptical, and it's good to have, a healthy sense of fear, right? Because I would rather folks be more skeptical about us rolling out technologies, good or bad, than just sort of accepting them. That was a lot, but
Sure. So I can see the legislators and the lawmakers have a huge burden on their hands to roll it out well with standardized procedures to make sure companies like Stevens Company will have the tools for the standardized measures so people feel comfortable to use it. And with that said, cities are still looking for companies like Stevens to help them implement these facial technologies as we've seen. The question from one of our audience, Sabina, is, are there challenges in the technology itself to warrant privacy, or are the challenges purely associated with storage and policy as it affects access to the storage?
I guess, I'll start on that a little bit. I think the sort of storage question, I think, is less central to the privacy discourse. There are, like, within sort of existing privacy regimes, questions about, how you store data, where you store data, who has access to data. But I think a lot of the privacy concerns that folks have are kind of a level step above that, right? Which is rather the use of a technology to watch my face to do something, right? It's not the, oh, you're storing my face. It's that you're constantly watching my face to make a decision about me. That to me is a privacy intrusion, a privacy harm that folks are concerned about. And there was the second part of the question,
is it policy as it affects access to the storage? I think you sort of answered it.
Yeah, and I think to that as well, it's like there are technical questions, right? Like a system that's determining, say, culturedness on a face, like, to me, technically, that's not possible, right? You can't determine how cultured someone is on the basis of their facial expressions. Like, that's scientifically, like, that's phrenology, or otherwise known as physiognomy, right? But I think there are technical questions, right? Whether or not things can actually be achieved, whether or not things are accurate, right? And then there are the questions of what does it mean, even if they are accurate and work perfectly, when they're used in practice, right? I think both are present in the facial recognition discourse.
Okay, one final question before we call it off. So this question is from Susan, and the question, Stephen and Javan, are researchers from Carnegie Mellon University showed that facial recognition could increase privacy risks, which we talked about. In some cases during the research, photographs of students led to guess their personal interest and also their social security number. Doesn't this mean I'm at risk for identity theft?
Well, I'll Stephen go first. I've been chatting too much.
Yeah, it's like I would not say so. It is like how actually it's like we store the actually it's like data, and it all depends on it's like the security risk. It is all actually it's like mostly it is like if you store actually it's like everything it is like secure actually channels it's going through. It is like if it is coming to the cloud also it is a secure channels. It's not everybody can easily access the data, and it is also comes about the cyber security things. So it is all actually it's like what kind of data we are storing and what actually how we are storing, and so it is I don't see any security risk in that one.
Okay, sounds good. So a 30-second closing comments from each one of you for those who are watching, and I would want you to sort of focus on what can that person do, not just in advocating, but if they do see the advantage of the technology more useful for them to catch the bad guys, then should they be more involved in piecing it together?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I think the first thing we always ask is the principal question is like, do we need this? Does this solve the problem at hand, or are we, in search of a problem? And I think, just being conscious of who the technology is used on, having input, it all really depends. If you're in a government position, there are a variety of things and questions you should ask. But also be aware. I mean, if say you're running a grocery store or another establishment, whether or not your system works and whether or not you like how it works, it might have serious implications for your brand, for consumers' relationships to you. So I think to think seriously about the concerns folks have, whether or not they're founded in the technical aspects or the philosophical, and just ask, the first principal question: do we need this? Are there other options we can use first? And then meaningfully engaging your community of stakeholders, whether it's your employees, your customers, or the general public.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Your closing comments.
Yeah, this technology is like mainly ease of use, and for the security, it is like it gives actually it's like more flexibility. It is like a lot of it avoids a lot of human errors. Like many things actually many issues happens because of the human errors, and it's like this actually is like avoids that one. This helps actually it is like helps humans to make correct decisions. So this technology is like very much useful and ease of use, and it's like make good decisions. So it's like I would say it's like this is it.
Okay. So I heard from both of you. I came in with a neutral view, and I'm sort of ending it up with the neutral view, but with more informed on what my role can be, and of course the audience's role can be. It's a useful technology, but also it's a technology that needs more work on. More policies and laws need to be passed. But I see it more used if it is customizable and very much protected, where audits can be done from outside agencies of such technology. I do continue to see the local government using it or putting proposals out for companies like Stevens to make use of this technology. So again, I want to thank you and Stephen and Jevan. And Jevan, please continue to feel better. I know you are not well, but thank you for joining us, though, and continue with those immune boosters. And Stephen, thank you for joining us and educating us with how the technology works, the uses and misuses, and how it can be improved. Thank you to our vendorship team. Please visit our site, vendorship.net, for more information on our upcoming events. Next Wednesday, we are presenting at 1 million cups. So that will be our webinar in collaboration with the 1 million cups. And we assist companies or navigate firms to secure local or regional or federal government contracts in a very easy, navigating it easily, and reach our website. And thank you again for listening, joining us this afternoon. And you're welcome to ask further questions, and we'll make sure we get to the expertise and they'll be able to respond to you. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon, and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.